before we begin, I want you to imagine hearing a sound in the middle of the night. Not gunshots, not screaming, but airplanes. Airplanes dropping explosives on American citizens. Not during a war, but against a black community the government swore to protect. What happened next would be erased from textbooks, buried by officials, and denied for nearly a century. This is the part of the Tulsa Massacre almost nobody talks about. For most people, the Tulsa Race Massacre is a tragic headline. But what you're about to hear is a story that was intentionally burned, buried, and rewritten. This is the story of Greenwood, a community so successful that newspapers around the world called it the Black Wall Street, a place where wealth wasn't an accident. It was built deliberately, brilliantly, fearlessly by people who had survived slavery, Jim Crow, and the violent birth of the American South. But what happened in 1921 wasn't just racism. It wasn't just hatred. It wasn't even just mob violence. It was economic jealousy. It was political fear. It was a coordinated effort to destroy black wealth before it became too powerful. And to understand the massacre, you have to understand what made Greenwood dangerous to the people who wanted it gone. Most histories talk about Greenwood's businesses, but they skip the part that made Greenwood truly extraordinary. You see, Greenwood wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a refuge, a sanctuary built by people who refused to be broken. The hidden reason Greenwood was so powerful. After Reconstruction, white lawmakers in Oklahoma passed law after law designed to push black families into poverty. They couldn't vote freely. They couldn't live where they wanted. And yet, they built one of the richest black communities in the world. How? Because of something many textbooks never mention. Greenwood's wealth came from land rights tied to indigenous nations. Many black residents of Tulsa were descendants of black freedmen, formerly enslaved people who were integrated into tribes like the Cherokee and Creek nations. When those nations negotiated land rights with the U.S. government, those rights extended to free black families as well. This meant thousands of black people in Oklahoma had something priceless. Land. Land they owned. Land the city wanted. Land investors needed. Land oil companies envied. And right beneath Greenwood, geologists believed were pockets of oil. Black-owned land plus economic independence plus rising black wealth equals a direct threat to Tulsa's white economic power structure. This part of the story? Silence for decades. By 1921, Greenwood had become something Americans had never seen. A fully independent black city inside a segregated America. Here's what they built. Dozens of grocery stores. Doctors, surgeons, dentists, black-owned practices. Luxury hotels. Movie theaters. Newspapers. Public transportation. A public library. Schools better than those white children attended. Greenwood wasn't just thriving. It was exploding. People weren't waiting for equality. They created their own world. And every day, white Tulsa looked across the railroad tracks and watched. Some admired it. Others hated it. But the most powerful men in Tulsa feared it. Because Greenwood's rise proved something America didn't want to admit. Black people didn't need saving. They needed freedom. And if this community spread, if this model multiplied, the idea of racial hierarchy would crumble, and so would the political and economic power built on it. On May 30th, 1921, an ordinary elevator ride became the excuse Tulsa's power brokers were waiting for. The story, you know, isn't the whole story. A young black shoe shiner, Dick Rowland, entered an elevator operated by a white woman, Sarah Page. She screamed. He ran. Within hours, newspapers printed the headline, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." But here's what they rarely tell you. Sarah Page never accused Rowland of assault. There were no witnesses. The two actually knew each other. Charges were dropped. But the headline did its job. White mobs gathered outside the courthouse demanding Rowland's lynching. Black World War I veterans from Greenwood, men who had survived trench warfare in France, marched to the courthouse to protect him. And in a moment still debated today, a white man tried to grab a black veteran's gun. The gun discharged, and Tulsa exploded. When people describe the Tulsa Massacre, they describe chaos. But eyewitness accounts tell a different story. This was not chaos. It was organized. It was structured. It was coordinated. The white mob was deputized. Tulsa police handed out guns to white citizens. Sheriff's deputies armed men with rifles, shotguns, and ammunition. Some witnesses said they saw badges handed out like candy. Within minutes, white mobs, now acting as law enforcement, marched toward Greenwood. House by house, block by block, black businesses were looted. Black families were dragged from homes. Property deeds were stolen. Safe deposit boxes broken open. But the darkest moment was yet to come. For decades, officials denied it happened, but survivor testimonies, archive letters, and military records confirm it. Greenwood was bombed from the air. This is a part almost no textbook ever mentions. Not by foreign enemies. Not during a war. By Americans using private aircraft. Witnesses described explosives dropped from planes, incendiaries falling onto rooftops, men firing rifles out the sides of aircraft. This was the first aerial bombing of an American city in history, long before Pearl Harbor, long before September 11th, and it was used against black citizens. Why erase this detail? Because admitting it would prove that the destruction of Greenwood wasn't a riot. It was an air-supported assault, a domestic military-style operation. Here's a hidden angle most people don't know. Tulsa city officials were preparing to take Greenwood's land before the massacre even happened. City planners had already drafted maps for railroad expansions, industrial zoning, commercial districts. They wanted Greenwood gone. The massacre made their dream easy. Burn the community. Blame the victims. Take the land. And that's what they attempted. When the smoke cleared on June 1st, 35 city blocks were destroyed. More than 1,200 homes burned. 10,000 black residents left homeless. Mass graves dug in secret. Insurance claims denied because companies labeled the attack a riot. But the part they never talk about is this. Black survivors were billed for their own destruction. The city tried to force them to pay fines for cleaning up the damage that white mobs caused. Some lost their land because they couldn't afford the fines. Others rebuilt anyway, piece by piece, brick by brick, refusing to die quietly. For decades, survivors told the truth. They were ignored, mocked, told they remembered wrong. The silence was intentional, because if people knew what truly happened in Tulsa, knew how coordinated the attack was, how deeply city officials were involved, how the intention was land theft and economic destruction, America would have to admit something it wasn't ready to face. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was an erasure, a cover-up, a calculated attack on black success. Within days of the massacre, newspapers stopped reporting. City archives removed records. Police logs vanished. Textbooks rewrote the event as a racial disturbance. For decades, teachers were told, do not mention Tulsa. Survivors who spoke up were threatened. Children were told their families were lying. Officials insisted nothing happened. The goal was simple. If nobody talked about it, it never happened. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. Documents reappeared. Eyewitness accounts were found. A new generation refused to stay silent. And today, finally, the world knows. Greenwood was not destroyed by a riot. It was destroyed by fear. White fear of black prosperity. White fear of black independence. White fear of a future where black people control land, wealth, and political power. They didn't burn Greenwood because it was poor. They burned it because it was successful. The Tulsa Race Massacre isn't just history. It's a warning. It teaches us what happens when truth is silenced, wealth becomes a threat, and power fears equality more than violence. They erased Greenwood from maps. They erased it from textbooks. They tried to erase it from memory, but they failed. Because today, people around the world are learning a truth Oklahoma spent generations trying to hide. You cannot bury history forever. Not when survivors carry in their voices. Not when communities rise from ashes. Not when the truth demands to be heard. Greenwood burned, but its story survived. And today, you are part of that survival. If stories like this matter to you, stories that were hidden, denied, or erased, then don't let this be the last one you hear. Subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but for the truth they try to keep buried. Because as long as we tell these stories, They never win.